Welcome to Neurodivergent Pulse, where we explore the often misunderstood world of neurodivergence with experts, parents, teachers, and therapists. Grounded in lived experience, each bite-sized episode gives you something practical to try. I am your host, Laetitia, AI expert, neurodivergent mom and founder of Understanding Zoe. This podcast is recorded on Darrell country. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hello, Michael. Thank you so much for joining the Neurodivergent Pulse podcast.
Thanks, Laetitia. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's actually a pleasure to actually be on. I know you've had some very fantastic guests in the past so far. So it's been a really good project to actually put together. So it's actually really good to sort of have that sort of podcast basically sort of like complementing Understanding Zoe, which we're basically going to talk about at the moment. So with my experiences of it, so I think it's going to be really important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. So I'm just curious, and I've shared with you a bit before the question, what would a typical week look like before you started using Understanding Zoe?
Okay, so I think sort of like from week to week, I think it would be really different and all that type of thing, because I think sort of, well, my kids and stuff like that, it does still sort of like, I must put a preference basically stating that week to week is still different for us, because you can't predict what it's actually going to look like and stuff like that in the first place. But before Understanding Zoe and stuff like that, there was no way you could actually sort of like find out like how do I sort of describe it? It's basically trying to sort of make sense of what's triggering your child. So I think I didn't have that sort of like, that sort of like the tool that I need to actually sort of like, go basically sort of like, solve day-to-day issues. So, I mean, I'm still sort of working through those at the moment. So I still have to preface that, being a autistic parent myself, trying to sort of work through sort of like, challenges and stuff like that, not with just one kid, with both my kids, but because they're sort of like so different in terms of like they're sort of like their triggers, their anxieties, their how they sort of like perceive the world, and with in terms of like how they like how they sort of like treat the like how they sort of like interact with the environment is also different. So, sometimes it's sort of like, sometimes it was okay and, regulating and all that type of thing, but sometimes it was very, very challenging. We're still sort of working through that now. I think Understanding Zoe has actually been is a really good tool now, especially now with my daughter sort of having some more, basically sort of, well, she's had sort of issues with school and all that type of thing. And we've been seeing a lot more sort of, basically sort of like things that we've noticed with her that, basically sort of, and also, basically I sometimes with my personality or my sort of like, how I sort of interact, especially with my daughter, sort of sometimes our autistic traits clash. And I'm trying to sort of work out how I can do this properly. So I think with Understanding Zoe now, it's given me a tool to actually sort of like, work through those issues together and all that type of thing, and trying to sort of get the information, or basically all we did was basically sort of have the information from reports and all that type of thing. Now we could actually upload the reports and basically try and get a sort of like an answer, a specific answer that I could actually really use.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that you are one of those parents who have their own neurodivergence while raising neurodivergent children, which is, really something that we noticed in those people who are loving Understanding Zoe. It's like navigating our own neurodivergence, which is my case, and supporting the neurodivergence of our children, which can be wonderful and challenging at the same time. It's not, the thing that we will say is good or bad. It's togetherness of challenging and beautiful. So what was the first moment you noticed Understanding Zoe, the app, making truly a difference? Like, what was a specific moment? I know I have my moment with the app, but I just wanted to invite you on because I know you're using the app and you've shared with me some moments. But what was a moment where you were like, oh my goodness, this is really helpful?
Well, I think with the PIP AI, it's actually sort of making a difference in itself. The first time I actually sort of like, I basically had the reports like in like a hard drive and all that type of thing. Now I could actually sort of upload all these things and also emails, and also sort of like, observations that the teachers have basically shared with us and all that type of thing, and the professionals have shared with us. I've been sort of trying to sort of like capture that on the app. So it's actually useful for me to sort of like, also capture those experiences as well, because I think, I'm still working. I'm basically trying to sort of work with the AI in the moment, because I think with the new version of the app, I think they ask questions. And I think sort of that sort of prompted me, like in only in the last couple of weeks, to actually sort of like really sort of like share the experiences that I had. I haven't had chance to actually sort of like really sort of write them down yet, because I've had them sort of in my head, but now sort of like I'm trying to basically sort of capture those in the app. So it's sort of like, sometimes you sort of have those experiences. Like, well, for example, I've basically sort of like, well, my daughter basically like absconded at a theme park. Like, basically, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, during the last school holidays. And I, with my sort of monotropic brain, I can only sort of do one thing at a time.
Mm.
So I think sort of like I was trying to sort of like, just trying to get a lifeguard, or trying to sort of like, then look for a child. And and there was a lot of things going on at the same time. And with me, I think sort of my brain was sort of like going in too many directions, and it was causing me to shut down. So I think sort of like, having those experiences and trying to learn from them and trying to sort of capture those. So if there's a situation again where there's a similar situation again, I know to plan for it. And I know to basically sort of like, I could sort of like, we could have a plan and all that type of thing, and try and sort of work out what plan is actually going to work and all that type of thing. So that's kind of like what I'm sort of aiming towards as well, because I think sort of capturing those experiences that we actually have as parents, with especially autistic ADHDers and all that type of thing, and because of both our children are a little bit sort of like, different in terms of like, their sensitivities and the way they react with the world. It's kind of interesting to sort of find out where, especially with me being autistic, an autistic adult and stuff like that, autistic ADHD, by the way, trying to sort of like work out what's actually going, what what will actually sort of, bring down sort of like, the stress with it. So I think sort of that's going to be useful in the sort of that aspect. But I'm working with that at the moment to make sure that sort of like, the capturing also happens and all that type of thing. So I think sort of like bringing the reports in, I think is so essential, and also sort of like sharing those experiences are so essential, because I think that will sort of help it to basically sort of like, prepare for next time. So that's, basically what my sort of like, my sort of strategy is to sort of find out, because I know sort of like, we've got sort of like issues with the morning routine and in the evening routine. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And also, trying to sort of work out what works and what doesn't, and trying to sort of work through those is going to be helpful with the app as well.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing all of this. And yeah, there is so many different moments where I know in our own journey with Zoe or with myself using Understanding Zoe, where I'm like, oh, that's so helpful to notice that pattern and then getting ready. Because I know, for instance, if I speak for myself, how when I get into a big event and I get to see lots of people, then I need a few days to recover, where I will be mostly non-speaking, where I will need to be by myself in a, kind of space where no sound, no light, no one is around me. And having that pattern and that information helped me plan ahead. So I love what you shared with us around planning ahead and having the ability to do so. So let's move into using the app for you as an adult, because you were using it before it was for adult. Now it is for adult in this new release. And I have been also using it because you used it and you shared about it on LinkedIn. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I could create a profile for myself then. So I'm just very curious about, what do you find most helpful for yourself within the app? Like, which feature do you find yourself coming back to the most to use the app for yourself as an autistic and ADHDer?
Yeah, I think sort of like, sharing how I interact with the world and also uploading my reports have helped as well, because I think with me being an autistic adult, I do have my own challenges as well. And I know sort of my wife as well, I know, God bless her, she does, have challenges, basically trying to interact with me as well. So trying to sort of like, work with that to be able to sort of like, help with our parenting has always helped with that. It's also trying to sort of work out how, myself and obviously my daughter and my son can actually sort of like work through these issues that we actually have, or the challenges we've got. Trying to sort of work out sort of how, basically sort of like my sort of like autism and ADHD sometimes clash, and trying to sort of work through that. I'm not the perfect parent. I mean, I'm sort of like, I'm pretty open to that, because I think sort of, I mean, we're not perfect parents and all that type of thing, but it's sort of like, it's helpful with the app, because it's sort of like, it helps sort of, sometimes manages the frustration, especially with it, because I think sometimes you can get frustrated without being sort of like, I got to sort of like take a step back and sometimes realize that basically sort of what I'm doing may not be helping. So sometimes, I mean, sometimes it does help, sometimes it doesn't. It just all depends on how you approach it at that particular time. And I think the having sort of like the AI and also linking it all with the profile definitely definitely helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for sharing that. And so in terms of, you mentioned it very quickly, but in terms of how the app has potentially supported or changed the way you communicate with clinicians or your family, would you like to share a bit of how you were doing it before and how you're doing it now, or how the app may be supporting this communication and connection?
Yeah, well, I've actually sort of promoted it with some of my sort of like, with the OTs and the speeches and all that type of thing, and the psychologists and all that type of thing, because I think it's a really important tool to actually use. I think sort of like, how to like, sometimes they sort of communicate directly with us, and it's sort of like, it's been useful to actually sort of upload those things to the app and all that type of thing. Sometimes, it's also important to actually sort of like, just communicate what we're feeling and all that type of thing. So sort of like, I think communication between like clinicians, the schools, and also the families is actually really, really important.
Yeah.
I think sort of having that sort of like that communication that's sort of like it's basically sort of direct, and what they sort of notice throughout the session is also really important as well. So we're also trying to capture that as well, trying to sort of like work those out and all those type of things. So I think sort of like sharing the notes and stuff like that onto the system itself, onto Understanding Zoe itself, has actually really, really helped to be able to sort of like, notice that. But, but they've been sharing it sort of like, via email as well, because I have invited them onto the app as well, but they haven't been able to accept. So I think sort of like having that integration will be probably important in the future.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like for us, with Understanding Zoe, we have teachers, educator, support teacher, OT, and speechy who are accepted using the app and the invitation. But we haven't been successful with a psychologist, for instance, and the pediatrician. And so that's very interesting how some of them, they're like straight away jumping in and being super active, such as our speechy or our OT, and others are more resistant. And I think it's all about the education around the power of AI and how we can really improve everything for everyone. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important. So what does actually having a tool like Understanding Zoe give you more of?
Well, basically more of these sort of like the tools we could actually sort of use in sort of situations where it's very challenging. I think sort of that's very important for us because, you know, you can have moments where everything's going pretty well, but then sort of like one moment it can sort of like bring everything down. And then sort of like, you know, you need that sort of app to be able to sort of like how to like have that moment where the sort of like, you know, the clinicians are not available or the school is basically not available and all that type of thing. So basically capturing those in that information itself, I think sort of like you need the parents need to actually sort of have that at the particular at that moment where sort of like, you know, where things actually do go wrong. And, you know, we know very well that sort of like things do go wrong and we need to sort of like, you know, it needs to be there at that particular time. I just wish I could actually sort of use it faster and all that type of thing and basically have that on hand. But it's more trying to sort of like, you know, work out what's going to be happening at the moment. And if there's like, you know, like, for example, if there's like a panic attack, for example, you need to sort of work out how to prepare for a panic attack and all that type of thing. And, you know, trying to sort of like, you know, say, look, I mean, it's like, it's more supporting the way that the actual sort of like the autistic brain actually works. I think sort of describing that in that type of thing and basically having a visual tool to be able to do that is really, really helpful as well, because it's sort of like, you know, what I also really like about it is basically you've got all these, like, you know, you can put a sort of like a document together basically with the strengths, weaknesses, the challenges and all that type of thing and the accommodations that you need to put in. So it's helpful within sort of like, within sort of certain settings as well, because I think sort of like having that sort of those accommodations and communicating those with them, I think is going to be is really useful as well.
Thank you so much. So before I let you go, I'm just very curious. What would you say to another neurodivergent adult or parent of neurodivergent children, or both, who is thinking about the app and they're like, no, I don't think this is for me? Like, what could you tell them because they're on the fence?
It's actually a very important tool. I think sort of like it will change how you actually interact with your children and interact with the world. Trying to sort of work with the actual sort of challenges you've got, and especially the AI app working with the reports and basically sort of learning with those reports what you can actually, you know, having a strategy to basically sort of try and work through a challenging situation. So I think sort of this is where Understanding Zoe comes in on its own with that. So I think sort of it's very important to do. And I think with that, it's going to be very important for parents to sort of have like, work through those challenging situations. I think it's going to be quite important to have.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So, Michael, you're a podcaster as well, and
Yep.
you're doing such an important work for the community with the Deep Dive podcast. Would you mind sharing for anyone who is listening to this how they can connect with you, learn more from your lived experience, and listen to your podcast, but also your speaking on stage, like whatever you would like to share with us for everyone who is listening to this to dive deeper into your work?
Okay, so you can go to deepdiveau.net if you, that's the main website where you can sort of have a look at what I do, my public speaking profile, and all that type of thing. I'm speaking at a few conferences later this year, so I'm looking forward to that. But I like to sort of get into sort of workplaces, organisations, and stuff like that, and talk about basically sort of parenting an autistic child, and also sort of like how I sort of basically how I do with life as an autistic parent. So I think it's going to be very important to have, and also trying to sort of like just trying to sort of like share my autistic story, because I think it's sort of I'm 51 now, and I've experienced sort of so many sort of aspects of my autism, like from a child perspective and also as an adult. So I think sort of like and having children, obviously, because obviously most of the time it's hereditary. So you have to sort of like realize that basically sort of if your children are autistic, it's most likely that you're autistic and you're probably not diagnosed yet. So I think it's sort of like it's an important conversation to have, and also sort of spreading the word, and also talking with neurodivergent affirming clinicians and professionals and all that type of thing, and lived experience people as well. So just capturing that lived experience, I think, is really helpful to be able to, especially Australian lived experience. I think it's sort of really helpful to actually sort of have that sort of like, to have that's why I really want to connect with everybody that sort of comes on the Deep Dive podcast, because it's sort of not just professionals that's being on, it's people with lived experience as well. So I think sort of like it's been a very important conversation, and it's also sort of like working through what their passions are. So I think sort of their passion is really sort of important to actually capture as well. So deepdiveau.net is probably the best way to actually sort of like connect with us. Watch our episodes. We've got a episode up online at the moment with the CEO of the National Citizens Card. That's probably a must watch. So have a look at that as well. So and it also sort of like it sort of captures like the autistic ADHD experience. So it's from a sort of like a lived experience point of view. So I think it's really important to have those conversations.
Definitely. Highly recommend the Deep Dive podcast. You were kind enough to invite me as well to be a guest on your podcast. And I think you do an amazing work for the community. And I listened to Michael at a conference last year in USA speaking about brownout and burnout, autistic brownout and burnout. And I really encourage anyone listening to this episode to just dive deeper into Michael's work. Thank you so much for coming today, Michael, and sharing your experience with Understanding Zoe so genuinely. I'm very grateful for you.
Oh, thank you, Laetitia. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
That's a wrap for Neurodivergent Pulse. If this helped, follow the show and leave us a quick review on your favorite platform. You can even share this episode with someone who needs it. You can learn more about our platform at understandingzoe.com. Thanks for listening.